Good evening, everybody. Welcome along tonight. Much like presentation one, we'd like to start this evening with the karakia. So I'd like to pass it on to Martin to lead the karakia.
Good evening, tēnā koutou. Nau mahara mai whakatau mai ki tēnei hui o tātou. Nō reira ki noi tātou. Let us pray. Me hongo rei kōria ki te atua, me maru mārongo ki te whiu. Te kāro pai ki ngā tāngata katoa. I te atua kārawa nei mātai au pongu. E tuku whakamumiti ki a koe. Kia piri mai, kia no tata mai, kia mātou ia mātou I hui nei I tēnei wā. Ma hau noi whakatuwhera mai kia mātou katoa. Ngā kuaha o te tika, o te ora, me te maramatanga. Mo mātou na koe whakamumiti, ake, amen. Kia ora mai tātou.
Kia ora, Martin. Thanks for that. Evening, everybody. Thanks for your time. Thanks again for coming out on a weeknight. I know people are particularly busy at this time of the year, so great to see a few of you here. My name is Paul Clunick. I'm the Acting General Manager for Engineering and Technical Services at Auckland Council. I'm also the sponsor for the Coastal Management Planning Work Programme, and I'm going to act as the MC for this evening. We should this evening as well have a few local board members and our local board councillors attending, so keep an eye out for them. Just a little bit of housekeeping for this evening. In the event of an emergency, we'll follow the instruction of the RSA staff. We'll make our way back out from where we came. There's some assembly points out by the car parks there. Bathrooms for anyone that needs them, back out through the door that you came in to your left. Just a reminder for those in the room as well that tonight's presentation is live streaming and it's going to be recorded. Online participants can ask questions, as with presentation one, via the email address that's going to be at the bottom of each of the slides that we work through this evening. What we'll do with those questions is direct them to the right specialists and departments within Council and endeavour to get you a response back over the next few days. So the format for this evening, as per the slide, so we're going to work our way through approximately an hour of presentation and importantly provide quite a bit of time for questions and answers for those in the room, and we're also providing an opportunity this evening to work our way around the room post the presentation to look at some of the posters that are up on the wall to help guide any specific questions that you may have. So to get us underway tonight, I'm going to pass you over to Council's project team on my left and have them introduce themselves, and then we'll kick into tonight's presentations. Thank you.
Kia ora everybody. So I'm Tracy Howe. I'm the Program Manager for Coastal Management Plans. I'm a Principal Coastal Hazard Specialist with Council. I work with Paul and the project team. And I'm going to pass you over to Richard.
Kia ora tātou, everyone. My name is Richard Rynan-Hamill, Senior Coastal Specialist for Tonkin and Taylor, working with Council on coastal hazard vulnerability and the coastal management plan process, and passing the baton on.
Kia ora koutou. My name is Nancy Baines and I work for Healthy Waters and a flood risk specialist.
Hi, I'm Matt Rivers, Coastal Engineer with Auckland Council, and I work with the Coastal Flooding and Coastal Erosion Risk Management, and also with the Coastal Asset Management.
So, Tracy, back to you.
Thanks, everybody. Welcome. Before we kind of crack into talking about coastal hazards, which will be the focus of the presentation today, I'm going to give you an overview of what we spoke about last time for those of you who weren't here or haven't seen the recording of that, which is available online. But essentially, we're just going to go over what coastal management plans are, what they consider, how they work. And basically, coastal management plans are long-term adaptive plans that focus on the impacts of coastal hazards and planning for climate change. Now, when we talk about adaptive, what does that mean? It means that the plans can change as conditions change. So a lot of what is going to go on in the future are things that we're a little bit uncertain about what that looks like. things may change quite rapidly, and we have to be able to adapt to that as we go along. So it's building that into our planning processes. CMPs focus on council-owned land and asset, so that really means the kind of public spaces, the public beaches, the reserves, the parks, and all of the assets that go with them. That includes the coastal defenses for the public areas. It also includes like the coastal stairways, boat ramps, toilet blocks, those kind of things. So that's the focus. In terms of long-term, what do we mean by that? We mean about 100-year long time scale. Now, the reason we plan for 100 years is we have some statutory requirements under the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement that require that. But also, some of the decisions that we make now are going to have very long-term impacts, and so we need to consider that. And so the other thing about CMPs is that in this process of looking at coastal hazards and climate change and building these plans, we also really need to incorporate the values of the local community. And that's because the community is the core of the place. The reason that we care about the coast is because people live there. And it's really important that we incorporate that into our planning process as well. So coastal management plans involve a lot of different aspects of council. So they involve all the teams that deal with hazards, the teams that deal with community engagement, and a whole raft of other things as well. They are co-designed with Mana Whenua, and we're working through that process through a variety of waimangas with them. But you might be wondering why we're in Whangaparoa and how we're going to do coastal management plans for Auckland. Well, the first step is that we're going to do a pilot. So a couple of years ago, the Ministry for the Environment put out guidance for local governments about how they should deal with coastal hazards and the impacts of climate change. Now, the implementation of that guidance is something that each council has been working through over time. And so we kind of have to pull that information into a process that works for Auckland. And so we're starting with a pilot. It's a test case. And once we figure out the process, we'll then scale that up across the region. So Auckland has 3,200 kilometers of coast. It's a lot of different parts. And when we've completed all the different pieces of the CMP, which there'll be about 15 of them, which will take us about 3 to 5 years, we'll then have a really good understanding of what's going on, what will be going on with the coast of Auckland, and how we can deal with that over the next 100 years. So why do we pick Whangaparoa as this test case, this pilot? Well, Whangaparoa is a really great place because it has a huge mix of beaches, cliffs, different wave exposures. It also has a variety of the different kinds of council-owned land and assets that we're looking at. And it also has extremely strong and established communities, groups that can tell us how they value the coast, how they use it, and help us trial this process of integrating all this information together. So in terms of how do you value the coast and what do we mean by that? Well, what we mean is how do you use the coast, but also how do you appreciate it? What's important to you? What do we need to make sure that we maintain or keep or focus on? The communities that live here will outlast any particular asset, so we're not focusing on a specific asset, but we're focusing on that much larger, broader consideration of what is important to keeping this place and this community intact in the long run. Now, there are some ways that the community can tell us about how they value the coast. The first is our digital platform, which is called Social Pinpoint. And Social Pinpoint is essentially a website, which is here, but is also available on the flyers, information, and is also on our engagement page at AK Have Your Say. This page allows you to drop pins, to add comments, to add pictures, to have conversations, to really tell us anything that you want to tell us about how you use and value the coast. We also have a community reference group. This is a group of engaged members of the community who would like to work directly with council on helping to build these adaptive plans by talking to us again about how the community values things and making sure that we incorporate that in our thought processes. Now, we still have some spaces available on the reference group if you're interested. Wendy will be available at the table to tell you more about that after the presentation if you are. It's a little bit time intensive, but it's definitely worth considering if you're quite passionate about this process. The other way that you can get involved is to come to the open day. So the open day is on May 8th. It'll be at the Whangaproa Library. Essentially, all of the council experts will be available to answer any questions you might have about coastal management plans. All right, so now that we've given you the overview of coastal management planning, we're going to talk about hazards today. So coastal management plans look at the hazards, their implications, and how they might change to climate because of climate change. Now, but what do we mean when we talk about these hazards? Well, we're really talking about coastal erosion, which is the loss of land, the wearing away of land due to natural processes, so waves essentially eroding the coastline. It's also coastal inundation, which is essentially coastal flooding from storm events. It's also rainfall flooding, which is inland flooding because of rain. And the reason rainfall flooding is included in a coastal project is that coastal assets can also flood from behind, but it's all an integrated system. None of these hazards exist separate from each other. Now, these are all natural processes. Coastal erosion, inundation, flooding, these are all things that happen. The only reason we call them hazards is because they impact things that we care about. All of these things are going to change because of climate change. And we have to be prepared for that. That's why we're developing these long-term adaptive plans. That's why we're thinking about this. That's why we're planning for that. So the next section of this presentation, we're actually going to take you through each of those hazards individually and explain how they work, what they are, and how you can find out more about them. So I'm going to pass you over now to Richard to talk about erosion.
Thank you, Tracy. Hey, can I just ask Matt, do I switch these lights off to improve the... Yeah, so sorry guys, because of the people online, we're just going to switch this front row of lights out and that'll help people see the screen clearer. I won't disappear too fast. Okay, well, hey, thank you, Tracy. I'm going to be taking you through a series of slides, a little bit of animation talking about what coastal erosion is. And typically how we see this is erosion is the loss of land and due to processes such as waves, currents, tides and storms. As Tracy said, it's a natural process that can happen from a single event, from a big storm, or can gradually change over time. Now, one of the things to think about in terms of the storm events is they can come up, they can attack the soft coasts, so we're talking about a beach kind of coast setting here. It will cause scour and erosion of your upper beach and your dune because of the storm surge and the waves attacking further up the beach, and can end with this kind of shoreline that I'm sure you've probably seen sort of all around the Whangaproa coast where you've got a beach, Stanmore Bay. Now, storm erosion doesn't necessarily mean a permanent loss of the shoreline. So storms come, they attack, they suck out some of the sand from the upper beach, but over periods of time, that sand, if it's not lost from the system, so if there's not a mechanism for it moving away from that particular part of the coast, can come back onto the beach, and the beach and the upper beach can stabilise and be restored. A lot of the Whangaproa beaches are these kind of pocket beaches, where you've got these little invade areas where sand's sitting in the system. That sand's come from the cliff erosion and shells and organic calcium carbonate kind of contents, and that sand's sloshing around in the system, and the storms can take it away, and the sand can come back after a period of time. So you've got that short-term erosion effect, but you can also get long-term erosion, and long-term erosion quite simply is where the amount of sand coming into the system is smaller than the amount of sand leaving the system that's caused by waves or currents or longshore drift. And this is a little bit of an example from the west coast in the South Island, down by Westport. It's an aerial photograph from 2003 showing Carter's Beach, which is just south of the airport there. There's a beach access track that runs along the back of the dune system. We're just having a look at that. So by 2011, so 7 years later, the beach has eroded and moved back to that access track and has been relocated since then. Now, the West Coast is an interesting situation in terms of it's a very long geological process of earthquakes actually bring a lot of sediment down the river systems and have built up the coast on the West Coast. Waves and the southerly swells have removed that sand and sediment over time, and now it's an erosive phase, and it's been in that phase for quite a few decades now. So what we're talking about is understanding storm cut, which can be a short-term fluctuation, but also then long-term erosion where there's a permanent landward retreat of the coastline. Sea level rise is going to increase that rate of erosion. Increases that erosion is because, now we also look at cliff erosion, and cliff erosion is quite a different process. For a start, you don't get big cliffs building back up again after an event. So cliffs only go one way, and that's landward. And the process, particularly for coastal cliffs, for erosion is that wave energy and tides can undercut the cliffs, making them unstable. The marine processes of waves and tides can also remove debris that's fallen down the cliff face. That can often form a protective buffer, so it keeps that face of the cliff clean and exposed for weathering process. And that weathering process, I'm sure you've walked along the cliffs and you can see this stuff just frittering off the cliffs during periods of dry weather and wet weather. That's a process that also results in that erosion of the cliff. So when you have that material removed, you create an unstable cliff. That undercut can cause block, topples and failures of material coming down the beach, the cliff face. And on top of the beaches, of the cliffs, you've got this weathered material, a softer rock that is weathered to sort of clays, and that can result in landslides and slides extending further up the cliff top. So you've got a number of different processes that operate on a cliff coast, all influenced by marine processes, defects, and the geology of the cliff. And I'm sure you've seen these kind of examples around, and certainly there's some opening slide shows some fantastic cliff kind of features showing exactly that kind of erosion process. And what I talked about in the first meeting is those wave cut platforms that are beautiful to walk around at low tide. Those are all locations and evidence of where the cliffs were some 6,500 years ago to the present. So all of those indicate an area where those cliffs have been receding. And as those cliffs recede, some of that material, a small amount, ends up in your beach systems. Now I've just passed on to Matt. He's going to tell you about the coastal inundation.
Thanks, Richard. So coastal inundation, or coastal flooding, is simply the flooding of land by seawater. Now this can occur as a result of tides or waves alone, but it most commonly occurs in combination with extreme weather events. Now these extreme weather events, particularly those with low atmospheric pressures or with sustained onshore or alongshore winds, tend to result in a raising of the sea still water level. And this raising of the sea still water level is called a storm surge. Now where you get a storm surge that raises the water level above the land, then you get flooding. And this occurs all over Auckland, so for example, Tamaki Drive in 2018 here. Now in order to illustrate the various components that contribute to the coastal water levels, we've used our best design skills to put this sketch together. Now on any given day, you get tidal fluctuations around the mean sea level, so between low tide and high tide. And these occur, so the range of the tides can vary, and this is due to astronomical processes. So you've probably heard of spring tides and king tides, and those are where the tide ranges are particularly large. And we can predict these tidal heights sort of decades in advance very accurately. But it's when we get onto weather events that it becomes a bit less predictable. So when you get the low atmospheric pressures and the sustained onshore winds, you get the storm surge component as well, raising the sea still water levels. On top of that, where you have waves breaking, you also get a process called wave setup. And this is a result of the energy released due to breaking waves. Now, all of these components raise the still water level, and so can result in inundation quite large distances inland. Where you have wave run-up and wave overtopping, these can also be very important contributors to coastal flooding in the immediate coastal zone near the waves breaking. But they're more dynamic and so don't result in the same inland flooding. And so for that reason, these are sort of excluded from our regional studies, but are important on a case-by-case basis. Now, each of these components can vary in magnitude. So with the assistance of NIWA, we've calculated the joint probability of each of these occurring in combination. And these are referred to in terms of annual exceedance probabilities. Now, these annual exceedance probabilities, or AEPs, are basically just the chance of a storm occurring in a year. So a 1% AEP event has a 1% chance of happening each year. Sometimes these are referred to as recurrence intervals as well. So a 1% chance of occurring storm is a 1 in 100 year event. We tend to use the annual exceedance probability terminology mainly because this better represents how a 1% AEP event could occur in any year, and just because it's occurred in the last year doesn't mean you're safe for 100 years. You may well have one the following year, you have the same chance each year. Now, by taking the coastal water levels that we've calculated and plotting these over the land elevations, we've mapped the coastal flood hazard for the whole of the Auckland region. And these are publicly available on Auckland Council's geomaps or on the hazard viewer. As you can see here, places like Akoromai Bay are particularly low-lying and particularly vulnerable to coastal flooding. And you can see that the darker colours are the more regular storm events. And as you get into the rarer storm events in the lighter colours, you get larger extensive flooding. Now, on top of that, you have rising sea levels. So if you think back to the previous diagram, if you get a raising of the mean sea level, then what is presently a rare event will become a more frequent event, because as all the other components stay relatively consistent and the mean sea level rises, you'll expect more higher water levels occurring. So what will be a rare event in the future will be more severe than the present day rare events. And you can see this from the mapping of the sea level rise with the lighter blue there. I think that's all from me, so I'll pass on to Nancy now.
Cool. Thank you, Matt. So I'm here today to talk about rainfall flooding, and I'm also going to talk you through some of the terms that you may have heard us use about this topic over the last couple of years and further back. So, rainfall flooding occurs when the amount of surface runoff or the amount of water overwhelms the drainage capacity of an area. And here in Whangaparaoa, the drainage system consists of both pipes and streams. Cool. So here in this illustration, we have a storm, the start of a storm. The rainfall is falling and hitting the road and draining into the stormwater pipe system. The rain that's falling on the open ground is being taken care of by natural ground drainage, and the system is performing well. This normal event, there's no flooding. The storm now is starting to carry on, it's getting more intense, and this drainage system is now overwhelmed. The water has nowhere else to go, it's got to flow over the surface of the land in overland flow. And this can cause flooding, and this flood risk can be made worse by blockages of pipe inlets. So if there's like a low area or a depression, the water can get trapped here, and we call this ponding. As the rain continues, the level in this depression can continue to increase. It may be drained by an outlet pipe, and say if that outlet pipe is blocked or the rainfall is really intense, that level can keep rising till eventually that depression can fill and it can overtop once more. We call those flood-prone areas in council maps. Cool. You may have also seen the term floodplain. So floodplain is the area that is covered by floodwater in a large rainstorm. So we're going to use a stream as an example here. So when it rains, the water level in the stream is rising until eventually the water can no longer be contained within the natural banks of the stream, overtops and floods the land either side of the stream. We're using the stream in this example, but it could also be where there once was a stream historically that has now since been piped. And what is climate change going to do for rainfall flooding? We're expecting temperature increases, and we're expecting that to have more intense rain. And with that, we are expecting to see more inland flooding as well. As Matt said, with the coastal information, Council has also used computer models to predict where these hazards may occur with the impacts of climate change. And we have them available, so whether you want to look at home about areas that you see where it is, you can do so on the Auckland Council's Hazard Viewer. Esme and Rachel over there have some cards that you can take home with the link on. And for those of you who are watching at home, it's on AK Have Our Say. You can get the link there. Cool. So, we've talked about the three hazards. We've talked about coastal erosion, coastal inundation, and rainfall flooding. These are hazards when they interact with us and they become a problem for us and the things that we care about. So Richard's now going to talk about the issues that they can have when they impact our communities and our physical assets.
Okay, so we've talked about hazards and we've explained the sort of the three kind of hazards that we're focusing on for this particular study and pilot that we're doing in Whangaparaoa. But as we've said, a hazard is basically a natural process, and it only becomes a hazard to us if it impacts on something that we value. And the risk from a natural hazard, something that occurs as part of all of our lives. What we care about, I guess, is understanding what that risk is. It's going to be whatever the hazard is, and the exposure of the things that we value, be it our house, be it property, a council asset or facility, and the vulnerability or the capacity for that to cope. So looking at all of those combinations of hazard exposure and vulnerability gives us an idea of the overall risk. And those risks can range from low to high, so that they all have different scales and effects. But what we do know that the risks that we currently have and can measure and can model will change as a result of climate change. So an increased sea level is going to increase the frequency of water levels reaching that particular height that Matt talked about. The increase in temperature is going to increase rainfall intensity, so the floodings are going to become more frequent of that scale of intensity. And we can't, whilst council and communities and governments are working hard on mitigation, trying to reduce our carbon footprint, trying to, I guess, flatten the curve and get down to lower levels of emission, we know that with the amount of carbon that's currently in the atmosphere, that we've got a system of change that will happen and continue to happen over the next few centuries. So part of the process that we now have to do as communities is understand the hazards and the changing hazards, the impact it has on us and our communities, and look at adaptation to help manage that risk. And as I said, the level of risk or the scale of risk will inform how we think about treating that risk. And when we talk about adaptive management, there's a number of sort of, I guess, headline policy statements that we talk about. We can say no active intervention. So if a hazard is low or it doesn't, the risk is low in terms of it doesn't impact on things of significant value, doing nothing is actually quite a reasonable policy decision to do. And as Tracy talked about, 3,200 kilometres of coast is a very big area to think about in terms of active management. And there will be some areas where there will be no active management. I gave an example last time of the difference in Holland. I worked for Delft Hydraulics for 4 years doing coastal research there, and they have 350 kilometres of coast and 17 million people, so quite a different proposition and level of investment for managing quite a small area. We've got 1.5 million people and 3,200 kilometres of coast. So the other policy option may be limited intervention. So what are the things that we can think about to slow the process down or to manage the process occurring over a longer time period? There may be things like dune planting stabilisation that can help provide buffers and sediment storage on the coast. There may be diverting or changing stormwater runoff and discharge down cliffs to help reduce that weathering process. There's a series of limited active interventions that can be done. The third policy option of hold the line is probably what we've done traditionally over the last several hundred years, is try and stop the natural processes from moving further landward through building of seawalls and coastal defences. And that hold the line in terms of inundation and pluvial flooding could be flood pumps and pumping stormwater and the like. Holland's been doing that for quite a while. Where I lived in Holland was 3 metres under mean sea level. So flood pumping was a fairly essential way of living. But that hold the line process comes at a very large cost, and it also is difficult now to change with increasing sea level rise. So one of the challenges my colleagues at Delft are dealing with at the moment is, whilst they've developed lots of dikes and protection to prevent the sea coming into their coasts, the pluvial flooding is increasing with climate change, and now that's almost becoming a bigger risk than coastal flooding. And the last option that we've got on the list is manage retreat. And this is avoiding the hazard, so reducing risk by moving out of harm's way, out of the way of the natural system. So understanding what that natural system is and thinking about, can we develop, change or modify our behaviours, our practices, our development to be outside of those areas where the risks are higher. And this illustration, which is purely illustrative, we've got a picture up there, that a photograph you might recognise, and a schematic of we've developed down for the Hawke's Bay, showing just how adaptive management can create increased space for nature to do its stuff. We've done a fair bit of work on trying to understand the hazards on the peninsula of coastal inundation, of rainfall and erosion susceptibility. And one of the things after this presentation we'll be asking people or inviting people to have a look at the maps that we've got around the room. But I'd just like to talk through the kind of information that we're looking at here. So we looked at 3 timescales: the short, the medium and the long term. Short term is sort of over the next now to 20 years, 40 to 60 years medium term, and 60 to 100 plus years for the long term. So when you look at these plots or maps, you'll see the title up there, long term or short term or medium term. And then we've got information on whether it's coastal inundation or rainfall inundation. And on the maps themselves, we've greyed out the background just so you can see the roads and the features, and we've identified all of council's reserves in green, and the beach areas in yellow hatched, and we've identified key council facilities. I'll just move to this side. So on the legend here, what you'll see is areas from the unitary plan showing areas of cultural values, beach ramps and steps, the water access, the beaches and reserves, our free water infrastructure, our wastewater and stormwater, and stormwater treatment facilities. So that's all the baseline information of what are the assets at risk, or what are the values that we're looking at in terms of council assets and reserves. What the map also shows is inundation zones. So in this particular map, what we're showing is inundation depths, or the amount of water flooding over the long term, so that's including without sea level rise. And we've got a colour band here going from light colours, as Matt was talking about, of low inundation depth to large inundation depths of over 3 metres. So what you can see here at Stanwell Bay, in the reserve at the eastern end, some fairly large inundation depths. that can happen there with a 1% storm surge event and sea level rise. Now, I'll just pass on to colleagues talking about preparing for hazards. So I'm sorry for sort of scaring you with all that hazard information now. I'm just going to be telling you what you can do about it.
Thank you, Richard. Kia ora tātou, ka Melanie Hutton tōku ingoa. I'm the Community Resilience Manager for Auckland Emergency Management. We're a department in Auckland Council, and obviously some of you may know us by the name Civil Defence, so our role is very much to be there, both to coordinate agencies when we're in a response, but also to work with those communities who are interested when we're not in a response to both understand their hazard risks, like what we've been seeing today, enabling people to explore how to reduce those hazard risks that you currently face now, and how to get prepared for future emergencies, be those big or small. Connect with those around you so that when we do have an emergency, you're really well placed to both cope yourselves, but also reach out and support each other. The more that you do that, it means that we as a coordinating agency and the other response agencies like fire, police and ambulance, we're able to really direct our attention to those who are most in need. So this slide is just to give you some information on where you can go to after tonight to really feel enabled to take care of yourself in the here and now. Because this conversation tonight is more about looking into the future, but there's an awful lot that we can be doing now as individuals, whānau and community, to really strengthen our resilience to emergencies in the here and now. So obviously the first one is to know your hazard risks, and I think that's going to become quite clear from the posters that you'll be seeing after this slide. But there is also, as indicated on the table, we have resources available that can direct you to the Council's Hazard Viewer website. So you can type in your address, where you work, where you live, where your mum lives, anywhere across the Auckland region, and really get an understanding of what the hazard risks profile is for those addresses. We also recommend downloading, if you have a smartphone, the Red Cross Hazard app. That is a way for you to get an alert in advance of, say, a significant weather event. And you can set that for both yourself, but also, again, for family and whānau who may live in other areas. It's an app that works across all of New Zealand. And I also really highly recommend the King Tides website. That's really important to this project, but it's also part of citizen science and a real opportunity to engage and understand how these coastal systems are working and giving you some insights into what it's going to look like in the future under climate change. The second thing is obviously getting prepared. And it's more than just having a few baked bean tins and some bottles of water. I really encourage you to go to our Home Ready website page, so that's on Auckland Emergency Management's website. Heaps of helpful information, which I'm sure you already do, but it's always good to just dip in and check and make sure you are. And then for a deeper dive, to go to the national website, which is getready.gov.nz. And again, I really stress, please pass this information on to others that aren't here today. Obviously reducing the hazard risks where you can once you know them, and we recommend that you go to the Auckland Council's Flooding Risk and Responses website page. Again, this will give you some more detailed information about what you can do for your property if you are in some of those flood risk areas. And then the fourth and probably the most important one is actually getting connected. And we know from emergency, look, even if we look at COVID and the significant level 4 lockdown that we had last year, the most heartwarming thing was the reaching out to neighbours and the checking in with friends, and that's what really made the most significant difference. So we really, really stress, get to know your neighbours, get to know who's vulnerable in your community and who you might be able to reach out and support. And I'd like to finish with acknowledging that you as a community are very fortunate. You have an active and a group that's been around for a long time here who's doing civil defence work. It's the Whangaparoa Emergency Response Group, and we're fortunate to have 3 of their members with us. They will be at the table after this, after you've looked at the posters. I highly recommend, please talk to them, get engaged. They are the face of civil defence preparedness and resilience building in your community. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Melanie. All right, so just kind of closing out the presentation. This process that we are going through is sort of set out in a timeline. The first beginning part is obviously these public presentations where we give the information that people need to understand what coastal management plans are, what the impacts of these coastal hazards and rainfall flooding and climate change might be. And then we have the third presentation, which looks at how we actually create adaptive management strategies, what those look like, how we incorporate community values. After that, we have that open day that I mentioned earlier, where the public can come and talk to us, the council experts, about the process. And then we go into quite an intensive focused period of development of looking at the areas of Whangaparoa and the adaptive strategies and the options and how the values of the community can feed together. That final open day that you see is where we'll actually present the proposed plan, and the community can come and talk to us about the findings of the process. This is our pilot. As I mentioned, we're going to have to go through the process of doing coastal management plans around the entire coast of Auckland in order to get a really good understanding of what it is that we need to do to make the coast resilient over the next 100 years. The next presentation, as I mentioned, is about adaptive planning. So if you're interested, please come along. It's on the 6th of May, so that's another Thursday night. It's really going to focus on how we turn the information that we just presented about, coastal hazards and their impacts into planning process and what that looks like. And now we'll just go to questions and answers, and I'll hand you back to Paul.
Thanks, Tracy, and thanks from me to the presenters. That was great. We've covered quite a lot this evening, so now it's an opportunity for you all to ask some questions in this part of the forum before we close for this evening, before we'll move around the room to look at some of the posters. Maybe before I receive questions, just an acknowledgement from me to Councillor Walker, Councillor Watson, your local board chair Gary Brown, from Hibiscus and Bays local board, and Janet Fitzgerald, who are with us tonight as well. So great to see you. Thanks for being here. Questions?
Sorry, just before we get into questions, I want to let everyone know who's on the live stream that while we have these posters here in the room, if you are watching this video, you can also find some information about the hazards on the Auckland Hazard Viewer, which is what Melanie mentioned. It's also, the link for that is available on the AK Have Your Say page.
The coastal plain, how far inland does it go and how far up to sea does it go? Does it go 5K, 1K, up to high tide, and then into how far? What are we talking about with this sim?
I'll pass you over to Richard, who might be able to answer that question and give you a bit more related context around the scope of the coastal management plans as well.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yes, the extent of the CMP process, which is focused on council reserves and facilities and infrastructure, is focused from effectively the mean high water springs to the landward extent of the hazards. So when you have a look at the hazard maps here, we're looking at the areas probably bounded by the long-term impacts of coastal inundation and pluvial inundation, and the seaward extent is around the present-day mean high water springs. And the reason for that is that the focus on this particular study is developing adaptive strategies for council land and assets and facilities.
Do you think you can grab the lights?
So we'll just put the lights back on.
Question back here.
Good evening. My name's Wayne Ankovich. I'm a resident of Manly, Whangaproa. I've been for over 40 years. The question I've got, I'm very passionate, like our First Lady that introduced this meeting, regarding our coast and particularly down in Manly. We talk about coastal erosion. There's two sides to that. We actually have what we class as vehicle erosion. Now, being a resident for over 40 years, I've seen what is happening, and I'm referring to Manly Beach and what I'm classing as the grass berm, which exists along the front there. I notice Wayne Walker is here tonight, and Councillor Walker and myself, about 2.5 months ago, had a meeting down on the Esplanade, Manly, and Mr. Walker said it was the worst he'd ever seen. The berm. The berm is not a berm anymore, it's sandhills. And the reason it's become sandhills is that vehicle erosion. We have threefold increase in vehicles on the coast in the last 30 years, no question about it. The thing that really concerns me is in the early 80s, the council planted a row of Bahudakawa trees along the foreshore there after all the macacarpas were cut down. Now, in this present state, what's happened is vehicle erosion has exposed all the roots of these Bahudakawa trees, and when you go along there, you can physically see them just out in the open air. Now, we need to manage this berm so it stays that way, because what happens now at Sandhills, every time it blew like it did on Saturday, all that sand that has been uncovered is getting blown across the Esplanade, which actually is a paper road. It's an easement to those houses there. And we're losing that berm, we're losing that protection from the sea and its elements. Now, I spoke to Wayne Walker about it, and he said, well, you know, we had a plan 10 years ago by a guy called Chris Burgess, who was in the Rodney County Council's Parks and supervisor, and he was going to, how would you put it, plan an action, but we know Rodney County is no longer defunct. But the situation we've got is getting worse. Now, the council needs to actually put into action something to protect these berms. Now, I'm not suggesting no parking down there, but what I'm suggesting is they'll have to put in parking bays and stuff like that, because the council, in their wisdom, along at Manly Park there, the nearest end to the beach, what they have basically done is follow that whole part off and then put a chain across to stop people from actually parking there, and it's the main access to the beach. Now, in my view, that is just double standards, because we have the berm and the residents getting, how would you put it, I'd use an eyeful or an earful of sand every time we get a blowdown there from these vehicles that are just inundating it, and it's like they are using it as a little bit of a racetrack. And what we need to do, if we want to not end up like Orewa Beach with putting rocks in front of our foreshore there, we need to actually manage it so we can control that berm so it stays as it is, a grassy foreshore area for people to come and enjoy. And I would like to know, as Councillor Walker said to me, we're on to it. I would like to know what is actually going to be done about it.
Thank you. Maybe that's one for me, actually. Great question and great context around Manly. I know the issue that you're speaking to well. And I think it's it's not just an issue for Manly, it's an issue for quite a few areas along Whangaparao where I guess there's an acceptance that our beaches are extremely popular. They're getting more popular, and I think we saw that through some of the COVID-related issues as well, more people wanting to spend more time closer to home in the coastal environments. Manly Beach, for those that don't know, is a beach with a road access way with a very small or quite narrow green space buffer before you actually access the beach. And the issue we have in that environment is with a lot of people that want to go there with their kids, with their families, they need to park their cars. Of course, they choose to park their cars on berm, under the trees, and that in itself is causing issues with, it's degrading the grass in there, it's potentially damaging some of the tree roots. This is the forum to raise these sorts of concerns, and this is the forum for us to collectively discuss and agree what the management options might be in response to issues like that. And there are a range of things that we can do, and I think in asking the question you also provided up some potential management responses. Could we bollard the area? Could we keep cars out of those spaces? Yes, we could, but that would put pressure on where other people park, so we need to think about that as well.
Well, you've done that along Manly Park.
Yeah, yeah, and there's some balance there as well. You're dead right. We've enabled access to some areas, we've bollarded off access from other areas. So we need to look at the peninsula in its entirety. We need to balance out some of the competing demands and use. And we need to think really carefully going forward and maybe not a knee-jerk response to some of what you raised around how do we provide for what people are valuing. And that's why we've asked for feedback, especially through Social Pinpoint, for example. Tell us how you value that part of the coast. And if the value is the green space, ease of access to the beach, if the things you're concerned about is vehicles and degradation of the grass, the trees, that's the stuff we need to know so we can put a range of management responses on the table and see how the community feels about that.
I'm not suggesting, or the other residents are not suggesting bollarding the whole thing off. I'm suggesting parking day and limiting the free-for-all that's going on, because, as I said, you've taken the option down at Manly Park there of bollarding that off so no one can get there, yet you're saying it's free reign for those people who want to come to the beach. We have to balance it out, and you, the council, have to put your thinking caps on and do something, because what we don't want in the end of the day is that berm gone, because once that's gone, the sea is there, and then you've got to protect that road, so then you've got to start putting rocks and all sort of paraphernalia. So it's a management thing that you guys need to actually look at, because 10 years ago, Chris Burgess, as the letter you've no doubt already read, was going to action it now.
So look, again, all really good points. Council does have a role and responsibility to work through this. You said a good line there, you said we need to put our thinking caps on. Council need to put their thinking caps on, but I think the challenge for everyone here tonight as part of the coastal management planning process is for us all to put our thinking caps on. What does the community, or what do the community want to see there? Let's prepare that range of options. Similar issues are occurring at Marakatea, at Arkles Bay as well. Is it a one-size-fits-all approach with what we agree or what we discuss? I'm not sure, but again, this is the forum, so great feedback. We'll take that on board. And if you haven't already, if you can go onto the Social Pinpoint and raise that as well, it'd be great.
Thank you.
And a question over here.
You know, one of the interesting things was about preparing yourself. I've only lived in Manly for 4.5 years, and then when we moved up here, we moved on Moulbrook Road. Now, you wouldn't think that that was a place that was going to be inundated with flooding, would you? But because of the way council and developers develop land, the land over behind us, where the houses developed, they put in solid concrete bitumen driveways. And then, the first year we were here, I planted a little garden down on our property, and we had an extreme rain event. And what happened was, all of those driveways acted like rivers. and the stormwater drains couldn't cope. And so my garden washed right through my property, onto the people behind me, and it was gone. You mentioned berms, so I looked at, what should I do? I got council out and they put some little marks on the road to say that they should make better drains. And 5 years later, the little marks are still there, but council hasn't been back, or whoever it is hasn't. So what I did was, I planted up the berm. Oh my God. Do you know it is illegal to plant up your berms unless you just put little tiny things down that wouldn't stop rain from coming through? And interestingly enough, the berm stopped flooding. When we had the second rain event 2 years later, the property next door, well, I have to say was the complainant, they were so badly flooded that their garage down the back had water knee-deep in it almost, right? And my question, or whatever it is about, is that, you see, the Auckland Transport controls the berm. And I've had threatening letters, and I've had visits from Auckland Transport. I asked them why, and they said, well, somebody complained. I said, well, what about all the other planted up berms here? And they said, well, nobody's complained. But in taking action, I haven't been flooded since. And one of the things, I've actually got a sheet here I prepared for you guys, and I think you probably know about it because you've been sent a copy. And it's called, What Lessons Have We Learned? And Are We Managing the Wrong Ecosystem? People are the problem, not nature. Nature was mentioned once tonight. I took that in once. And we need to look at, it's only going to get worse because of the way we live, because of the way we let developers develop. So we need to look at, now that you've frightened the hell out of everybody with what's going to happen, what actual action are you going to suggest that people take? Are we going to stop consuming plants and vegetables, plant trees, make better parks? We live next door on Walbrook Road to a park. Why would I send my kids there? Well, recently, they dug it all up and put some concrete down, more concrete. Did they do something that would encourage kids to go there and not come down to the beach? Actually, I've got a suggestion for you. You know what you should do? All you guys that live down there should take your fences down and make a parking lot right in front of your houses along there so that the berm can stay there. And when we get a really extreme event, you guys don't get all washed out.
Yeah, they never become a park on my lawn.
Well, that's right. I come apart from your lawn. So, what my question, or whatever it is, really is, you're working in silos. How come I plant up the berm, which is it stops the action, and I get harassed by somebody else? Auckland Council came out and said, it's not our problem, this belongs to Auckland Transport. So if you're going to make changes, if you're going to do things, you've got to have all of you working together so that I don't get in, well, actually, my next door neighbor's Mara Maiden, so I won't get in with threatening letters from Auckland Transport. So there you go. But if anybody wants to see the 10 or 50 issues that I think they should consider, here you go, I've brought 20 copies.
Thank you, and thanks for your time pulling those questions together. So we have received those, and we'd be more than happy to spend some time with you to address those. So some of the questions relate, we can better direct some of the questions to other parts of council, so we make sure you're getting the right information.
That is exactly what I mean, is that unless you're all on the same page, like Auckland Council has got a thing about letting people rip out mangroves. Why would we be ripping out mangroves, for God's sake?
So from a coordination perspective, collaboration perspective for council, that's extremely important. You've heard tonight from various departments across council, so hopefully that's a demonstration that with respect to the Coastal Management Planning Program, we are joined up. You raised something else in your questions around an operational matter that I think we need to take back and make contact with you as well, around the people that have come out to view your issue. They've obviously marked up some of the ground.
And I want you to be thinking about, you're thinking about the coast, and that's great,
Cool.
but the land and the coast is related, and so whatever people do on the land is actually going to affect in the end. So you need to start managing people and let nature manage the rest.
Look, completely agree.
I guess as a slightly impartial person, so I don't belong to any part of council, but totally understand what you're saying in terms of silos. I think this project is, I think, quite a new process for council, and there is a lot more integration and discussion around all the council family for these coastal management plans. So I'm hoping that this does start a new way of doing things. Your point on management or adaptation options is absolutely spot on in terms of there's things that everyone can do that help minimise the impact that we have on the environment. And water quality and discharge into the coastal environment is a hugely significant thing, that if we can improve water quality, if we can get shellfish growth coming back, that actually provides more material on the beaches and helps build up the beach and the burns as well. So good water quality is a good thing. Looking at how we control catchment runoff is important. It is complex and complicated. So if you stop water coming somewhere, where does it go and what impact does it have on somebody else? And I think those are the kind of things that the Healthy Waters team and their models can help show. But moving to nature-based solutions is a strong focus for what we're looking at. And certainly in the discussions we've had with Mana Whenua, it's all connected. So understanding that connection from the burns, where the sand goes, all of those kind of things, and what can we do using natural systems and mimicking or restoring natural systems is a focus of the adaptation options we're looking at.
I'd also just like to kind of point out that I think Auckland Council is really in a new phase with the declaration of the climate emergency and the finalization of Tariki Atapiri, which is Auckland's climate plan, which really lays out what Auckland Council can do and will do around mitigation, of course, of kind of reducing carbon, but also adaptation in the future. That document and Council's declaration together really give leverage to getting Council as an organization to look at these things as an entire system, to look at that impact and to plan for that. So I think some of the things that you raised, they kind of feed into this idea that Council does need to take that much bigger, broader perspective in order to manage everything properly. And that's really what the function of the adaptation stream of the climate plan is for.
Does the coastal plan include islands around the Hauraki Gulf, even uninhabited?
Future coastal management plans will consider the offshore islands as we move around different parts of Auckland. The pilot for Whangaparāoa does not. Any other questions?
Hello everyone, my name's David Wright. I live in Orewa, so I'm a little bit out of zone, but I have a more general question. I'm very concerned about the rate of sea level rise, and I think most of this is happening out of the sight of most people, and most people are not really aware of what's going on. I refer particularly to the amount of ice that's coming off Greenland. I think it's now trillions of tonnes a year. And the fact that the Thwaites Glacier could collapse and could lead to the collapse of the East Antarctic, I think it is, ice sheet. And just a quote from a Reading University study just put out recently in Nature Communications, it says that sea levels could rise very quickly and by a lot. And I just wonder if the council has any sort of plan what it is if this does happen.
I might pass that on to Richard in the first instance, just to talk a little bit about sea level rise.
So you're absolutely right in terms of sea level rise, and we're seeing even looking back in the last 100 years, sea level, the rate has almost doubled. So it's not something that's going to happen in the future, it's happening now. So over the last 100 years, say it was 1.7 millimetres a year, which it doesn't sound like very much, but when you say over 100 years, that's 17 centimetres, you're talking about quite a big change. Now, since 1994, that rate has doubled to about 3.3 millimetres a year, so it's a big change. The projected future, we're using the advice from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and NIWA, who's done the local downscaling for us in New Zealand. It does look at the concentration pathway scenarios that the IPCC use. So we're going from a 2.6, and this is to do with the amount of emissions that come into the atmosphere. And the way this works is they've come up with 4 scenarios of how the world might be in the future. And each scenario is based on a different kind of emission and scenario in populations and change. So the 2.6 is the scenario we need to be on to manage carbon and reduce temperatures to manageable, still changing, but manageable levels. It goes up to 8.5, which is a significant increase in sea level rise over the next 100 years, between 1.5 and 1.8 metres, towards the upper range of those predictions. And we've looked at a range of those sea level rise scenarios. Now, there's the talk about if there's a catastrophic change, and there's more papers and research coming out that the historic rate of sea level rise could and has been much faster than what they originally have thought over the last... so typically they were saying a metre a century is about as fast as it could get. Recent research has shown historically in the Holocene, so 10,000 to 6,500 years ago, it may have risen by as much as 3 metres a century. So it's possible to get larger rates of sea level rise. What we're planning for is what we are using for the MFE guidance, but we are looking at, so we've got a baseline, but we are stress testing it with higher rates as a stress test.
What would you do if suddenly rose
Yep,
a metre?
so if it suddenly rose a metre, it would create significant impact on everybody. So there would be road closures or inaccessible passages. A metre sea level rise, in reality for Auckland, we do have the benefit of hills in many areas, so it's going to impact certain areas worse than others. So if you look at Helensville or floodplain areas, that's going to have an impact. One of our advantages is with a large tide range, actually, a metre straight sea level rise is going to cause permanent inundation, but the issue will be when there's a storm surge or something coming. So they are things that council are looking at, and they've got models and data to show what those extents are, both from a change in the tidal range with sea level rise, as well as a change of extreme levels with those sea level rise. And that's the information that we're using for doing our hazard vulnerability assessment, so we can identify areas of greater risk around the Auckland region. And the point there of greater risk is it's a significant issue, and it's not something that council or anyone can afford to protect absolutely everything. So it's going to be about making choices and how we plan to avoid new development in those areas, how we plan to transition away from areas of high risk. As Tracy was saying, the climate change emergency is changing the way through the unitary plan of how council plans, both for mitigation and adaptation.
Any other questions?
Kia ora everyone. My name's Tina. I'm also here representing Future Whanapoa Trust. My whānau and I have been coming to Whanapoa for 30 plus years. We've been coming since I was a child. This is where we come and gather our kai moana. This is where we come to fish. We are originally from South Auckland, but our background is Cook Island. And now we are areas they also park where I thought you shouldn't be parking. But in saying that, we also need to realise that Whangaparaoa is a place for holiday makers. We get a lot of tourists, family come here, they use the beaches, parks, weekends, school holidays, Christmas holidays. They come in the buses, bus loads, camping. So I would be interested, I'm also on the community reference group, on how we can educate people that do come onto the peninsula about what the plan is, or how can we share it with our schooling, education, making it child-friendly, so that other people understand as well.
Thank you. It's a really good point. Actually, I think how we talk to the wider group of people who are going to be engaging with these spaces over time is quite important. So in terms of the hazard aspects, emergency management works quite hard to reach everyone across the region. In terms of the coastal management plans, the result of all of this process will be put together in a report that will be publicly available that anyone in Auckland can look to. And that will be true of all the coastal management plans. And I know that as we roll through the coast of Auckland and we talk to people about the areas that they live in, they'll also be curious about what this process results in for other areas around the coast. And we do intend to make all that information available. It's actually quite an important thing that people understand that the coast of Auckland is the whole coast. And speaking to the earlier stuff, although we're going to do these in these areas, one by one, Auckland as a region is an integrated thing. And we have to focus on that. We have to focus on the goals of the process and integrating the values, obviously of these local communities, but also the wider community of all of Auckland together. Any other questions?
Hi, I just had a question about the you mentioned 4 high-level options, and I just want to get granular information on what they actually look like. We don't often, as a community, get consulted thoroughly on decisions council made, and we saw this in Oregon with the statue that cost like almost $200,000, I think it was. I think it was 70 people gave feedback on it, but when it actually got posted on Facebook, it was over 1,000 people gave feedback actually refuting and going, why was this money spent, and no one actually liked it. And I just think that maybe we're a bit more kind of getting up to speed with, social platforms for feedback. We're not calling household, 09 numbers that no one really, landline numbers that no one really has anymore. Yeah, my question was when we get great information to make informed decisions and alternative.
It's a really good question because Richard mentioned the kind of high-level strategies that we have, which we sort of said when we have no active intervention or we allow these processes to just continue happening, hold the line where we kind of work to maybe naturalize the coastline in order to defend it, manage retreat where we might look at moving things back. But what each of those look like in practice can be quite different. You can have a variety of mechanisms for defending something. You can have a variety of mechanisms when you manage retreat. And if you want more information on what some of those options are and how we make those decisions, please come to presentation 3 because that is what the focus of that is all about. It's giving you the information on what does it look like in practice, what did it look like in other places, how do we choose between an area where we might continually add sand to allow the coast to rejuvenate itself, to another place where we actually move things back but create a dune system that then naturalizes the area and creates space for natural processes. The difference between those decisions, there are coastal engineering considerations. It's also about how the community values and uses that space. So it is a very complicated, complex kind of process, But we want you to be with us on this, and if you need more information, we can work to provide that. But please come to presentation 3, or it'll be live streamed like this one is, so watch it online. And if you want actually to be with us as we develop these, join the community reference group. It's the best possible way, because you'll be in the room with us as we walk you through what these different options look like. Yeah.
So maybe just to add to that as well, we've been quite purposefully not getting into the granular detail straight away. So it's very much a process over the first few presentations to bring people up to speed with what we're seeking to do, to work through a better understanding of what the related hazards are. You've heard tonight that we've touched on possible management responses, but we're a little ways away from applying them to Whangaparāoa Peninsula. And the reason that we can't apply them to Whangaparāoa Peninsula yet is we yet to hear people's feedback, how you value the coast, how you use the coast, what's important to you. And we need to fit management responses to the information that you share with us. So I think we've talked a lot tonight about council evolving and learning and trying to do better. I think historically public meetings led by council would often involve, we've got an issue and here's what we're going to do about it. That's not the sort of discussion that we're having tonight. It's very much around we have a plan, we have a framework, and what we do with that framework and what management responses we apply is very much going to be led by the community. So we need to listen more, and then we'll work our way up to explain some of that granular detail over a range of management responses. And then we'll be asking, how do you feel about that? How does that fit?
I guess kind of my point is that it's hard to, as the community, I don't want that, makes me too nervous, sorry. As a community, so where I was coming from is it's hard for us to make an informed response back when you're saying here's the high level, but not giving kind of examples of what that might be, to be able to go, okay, well, I can't remember what the topics were, so but one was about like basically like stormways, like you could increase that and it comes with an increased cost. Okay, so how does that look? Is that potentially, could that be big 3-4 metre drains like we have overseas, or is that going to be more drains? What kind of budgets could come with that? Just kind of giving some ideas. You said managed tree. Well, what does that look like? Does that look like council buying land and that becomes reserve? And it's not going too granular, but just giving some examples on what that looks like, and if people can start forming ideas in their head, and also maybe giving some sort of like estimated budget range as well, so people can actually put everything together and go, okay, well, if we get big 5-metre drains, put in through Whangaparāoa, through Auckland, and that's going to cost X amount of money, versus having all of this coastal land bought out, as an example, that realistically there's going to be huge infrastructure in small areas, or that could be huge, what's the word, disruption to our day-to-day when the land ripped up, just, I don't know if that makes sense. So yeah,
No, it makes complete sense. So again, we're working our way towards being able to explain those sorts of concepts, management responses and costs better. But it will take some time. So we need to start with these high-level conversations.
But when we get that response, is it going to be too late? Council already made their mind up, or will we get it? Will we still actually give a response based on examples?
I was involved in the Hawke's Bay Clifton Tankoia Coastal Hazard Strategy, where we worked with communities to develop a long-term plan for those communities. When we look at what Auckland Council is doing, they're taking, I guess, a more refined approach of looking at council assets and land, and using this also as an opportunity of informing communities about the hazards. Often these are meetings for the first time you're actually hearing about there's some hazards and there's some climate change things, and having some information about what those hazards are. We are going to be talking in the next meeting about the kind of adaptation responses that we will be looking at for council assets and council land. It's still very much a position where we're informing communities about change, we're seeking feedback on those things of values, and we've had some really good discussions on values. But you're absolutely right. The solutions are going to be subject to effectiveness, cost, and fit. And with climate change, with a large coastline, there's going to be tough choices and prioritisation of how council can spend money that benefits the communities as best it can, but it won't be everyone getting everything that they want, and that's part of that reality. So the community reference group is a similar concept to what we had in Hawke's Bay, where we have a group of informed members of each community in the Hawke's Bay who worked with council and engineers and scientists to look at adaptation options and went back to their communities to talk to them. So that kind of diffuse way of providing information worked really effectively, rather than council try and broadcast or tell people it doesn't work as well. And that's the process we're going to be looking at for Whanaproa. So that reference group is interested members of the community who will be working with council to discuss and dive down more deeply into the adaptation responses that will be covered at a high level in the next meeting, to think about what those strategies could look like. As Tracy said, this is the start of like a 10-year plan, because it's going to take a while to do this, to understand priorities, to think about things like what that costs and implication into long-term plans and who pays. So this is very early days from that kind of process, but it's something that council's thinking about, but it's not racing into this is what's going to happen this year and it's going to be implemented next year.
I think what we'll also try and do as part of this process as it evolves is to share some case studies. So you were talking a bit around the community's understanding of potential management responses and what they involve, what they look like, how they feel. We're quite lucky throughout Tamaki Makaurau that we have examples of lots of successful examples of the 4 types of management responses that we talked about at a high level tonight. So that's part of informing and helping educate as we move forward as well. So another question here.
No, I'd just like to interrupt to just follow on from behind me talking about I put the statue down there on Rua Beach. She was probably trying to relate to the council that, the council made the decision on that particular project, but there was not much in the way of public feedback for it. And there was a lot of concern in it because, okay, the council put it upon themselves to obviously discuss it. But what they didn't do, they didn't include the wider community and the money that they spent on that so-called statue there. So, yeah, the point is what we probably need as a community is that we need to be able to put input in. Panuka decided that they were going to sell all those houses that the ratepayers paid for along Whanaproa Road because, they could put that money to better use or something like that. With no input from the public, but the public outcry over it all of a sudden made them change their minds pretty quickly. So I think going forward, the public needs to be inclusive more than just the council and their own wisdom and in their own, how would you put it, community make the decisions for us without consulting on serious issues like coming up in the future.
Thank you. I agree. We're here to listen. So thank you.
Can I make a point just following that without the microphone? I'm just saying that we're actually fortunate as well. This is Coast Facebook group. It's actually one of the largest in New Zealand. I think it's got over 60,000 members in it. So I think that there definitely should be a forum that should be used as a forum as well for feedback.
So brilliant feedback. Any suggestions around how we might improve engagement? We welcome. We would love to have an audience here tonight of 1,000 people, 2,000, 5,000. It's important stuff that we're talking about. It's challenging to reach people across during a weekday when people have conflicting pressures. we're trying to make an effort tonight by obviously live streaming and recording these sessions as well, but reaching out through established networks is fantastic, and if people can share the future presentations that we put up there or the dates for those with their networks as well, that'd be really appreciated.
Just a quick idea, people are talking about, they haven't been consulted, there's so much ignorance in the community about climate change and what's really happening, so good on you for actually showing what's involved. Why not put up a reading list about some of what's happening, like for example, Countdown, if they read that book, then they would actually come to meetings like this and not talk about infrastructure necessarily, but talk about where is nature going here? Where is she taking us? Have we not learned anything from the pandemic that's been out there? And we can't control now, because of the way we live, we just can't control climate change and the rising temperatures. We won't get out of our cars. We won't stop consuming. We won't stop dumping our waste so we can go up and pollute the Kuiper Harbour up at the Don Valley. What are we talking about? We need people to get educated.
I think you're right. I think that, we were just in a meeting this morning discussing the fact that a lot of people don't understand what the climate change looks like in the future, what the impacts are going to be. I do know that, of course, with the climate plan, which I mentioned earlier, there is a lot of work that's going to be coming out when that starts implementation in July to actually start to pull that understanding together into formats that can reach the communities. And there is a lot of work going on with young children in environment schools and all these programs to actually make sure that the next generation really understands. And there's a lot that we have to do, and we'll take the steps that we can, but the community has to come on that journey with us, and that's where we're at.
G'day, I've just got a question that might provoke some interest. So the scope of this particular plan is around council assets, correct? But what follows is that the consequences in terms of whether it's managed retreat or permitted retreat or whatever are inevitably going to impact private property. And that is an issue that you're not confronting directly, but essentially you are confronting it indirectly, because if you don't protect the beach, if you don't protect the road, if you allow inundation in a given area, then that implicitly is going to impact on the people that are going to be inundated in that area. It's also going to impact on the people that may not be inundated, but effectively their stormwater is adding to the flooding. So it impacts on everyone in the catchment. So how are we going to deal with that through this process, or is that an additional process that gets layered on top of this? How do we confront it?
Thank you. The short answer to that is it is another process that's going to be layered on, Councillor Walker. So we are initiating a process or a project that is focused on council's land, council's assets, council's primary responsibilities. You're right. Divorcing private concerns, private land will be difficult. And some of the feedback that we're seeking tonight and via Social Pinpoint is for those people that own private property, beachfront property, to share with us some of their concerns as well, concerns that they may have. I think as we progress through this process, there will be an opportunity to better define council's role and responsibility, and to better define the roles and responsibilities of private landowners as well. There is provision within some of our future presentations and within some of the questions and answers, frequently asked questions that sit in support of this initiative, to clarify council's role and responsibility, questions that we've received in the past by private property holders about what their responsibilities are. So we'll be layering some of our response to the private land issue as we go forward. But at the moment, we are very much focused on council land, the council assets, acknowledging that we definitely need to do better in that space before we start to layer additional considerations.
And I think, Councillor Walker, one of the things we've talked about in this particular phase is informing about the hazards and the potential effects of climate change. And that's across the whole Whanaproa for this cell. And we'll be doing this across the whole region. So there'll be base information on the hazards, not necessarily consequences for everyone. Government, as you're probably aware, are exercising their minds on high-level policy from a national level, and that's going to inform some of those larger decisions, and that's where the layering process or coming later comes in, because those kind of high-level policy things haven't been set yet, and that doesn't give us the framework or structure to have those conversations.
Any other questions? Any other comments that anyone else wants to make? Any of our elected representatives before we conclude?
Just an answer to the gentleman down the end there about Manly Beach. The local board have had a presentation to us about what they think we should be doing down there. So it is on our radar. We do know the problems that the cars are causing coming down there, and there is talk of putting some things up down there to stop cars, not all the cars, but some cars from getting onto the sand dune down the front of the beach. So it is a work in progress. We're well aware of what's happening down there at the moment.
Yeah, just some good comments and questions from people here tonight, but I would just encourage people that have got that interest to perhaps join this community reference group, because what we often find, as much as there's people with an interest, often it relies on a few key players in the community to actually kind of take on the mantle to make things happen. And if you go out to people as a whole, yes, you sometimes do get a feedback of a sort, but I think in this instance it's the sort of people that are here tonight that will perhaps make a contribution that's reflective of our community as a whole, that goes to real life examples and makes this a meaningful exercise. So I don't know, Paul, if there's been much explanation as to how people might join that community reference group, or if it's coming up, but I think given the quality of some of the observations here tonight, it might be worth perhaps signalling that.
Thanks, Councillor Watson. I might just pass back to Tracy, and she can just remind people the slide that we talked to around the community reference group.
Yeah, I won't put the slide up, thanks, Paul. But essentially, the community reference group, as I mentioned, they'll work with us to understand the input that we're gathering from the community and how those values might fit into the options that we can choose. Anyone who joins the community reference group can expect to spend about maybe 20 hours over the next couple of months helping us in this process. There are applications forms, and if you're interested, Wendy, who's sitting at the table, can tell you more about that. We do have spaces, so please, if you're interested, do join. I think, so that was a really great round of questions. I've put this slide back up because what we have, as we mentioned around the room, are posters showing the hazard extents across the Whangaparo Peninsula. And this is the slide that tells you how you can be prepared in the case of emergencies, in the case of hazard events. We'll all be here to answer any questions you might have about these posters. They're broken up by area, and each area has the coastal inundation, which is that coastal flooding piece, and that extents on the top, and the rainfall areas on the bottom. For information on coastal erosion, that is over by that window. It's done a bit different because we don't yet have full GIS modeling for that because we just published the regional report. But we do have the council experts who manage that, as well as our consultants from TNT to give you any information you might want to know about coastal erosion. So please have a look around, and thank you.
If you have to leave, that's great, but we're going to be hanging around here and happy to answer any questions. The comment on the Facebook page, if you could give your details to Wendy too, we'll try and get the live stream posted and also the link to the social pinpoint for feedback.
Yep.
Look, and a thanks from me. Look, those people that are staying, there are other council staff in the audience tonight, so look for someone with a name tag on. If you would like to introduce yourself, we have representatives from the Parks team, Healthy Waters team, Engineering Technical Services. Please feel free to engage.
And we've tried to go from east to west, so Army Bay there and Red Beach over there, so hopefully you can find a spot where you're interested.
And our colleagues from Emergency Management are sat right next to Wendy.
Thank you.